Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked through the crowded halls of Kepler Trade Station. The air smelled like oil and too many different kinds of alien food mixed together. He hated this place, but his ship needed fixing. And this was the only station for light years that had the parts he needed. His cargo ship. Lucky Strike had broken down 3 days ago. The quantum drive made a horrible noise and then stopped working completely. Without it, he could not jump to faster than light travel. He would be stuck flying at normal speed for months to reach the next system. That would ruin him financially. Mechanic who could fix his drive was a slimy Corvin named Blex. Blex had the parts and the knowledge, but he wanted more than just money. He wanted Jake to do him a favor first. Jake did not like the sound of that, but he had no choice. Blex led him through the darker parts of the station, where honest traders rarely went. The lighting was dim, and the corridors smelled worse than the main areas. They passed bars where dangerous-looking aliens drank strange liquids and made deals in whispered voices. They stopped at a heavy metal door, guarded by 2 large Zephyrian soldiers. Their gray skin looked like stone, and their red eyes glowed in the dim light. Jake had heard stories about Zephyrians. They ruled a large empire and were known for being cruel to other species. Blex spoke to the guards in their harsh language. One of them scanned Jake with some kind of device and then waved them through. Inside was a large room filled with cages and holding cells. The smell hit Jake like a wall. It was the smell of too many beings packed into small spaces without proper cleaning. This was a slave market. Jake stopped walking. He had heard these places existed in neutral space where no government had control, but seeing it made him sick. Hundreds of different alien species were packed into small cells. Some looked scared, while others just stared at nothing with empty eyes. Blex noticed Jake had stopped. He turned around with an ugly smile on his face. "Your favor is simple, human. I need you to buy one of these creatures and take it with you. I owe money to the dealers here, and this will settle part of my debt. You buy 1 slave, and I fix your ship for free." Jake wanted to punch the greedy alien, but that would not help his situation. He needed his ship fixed, and fighting would only get him thrown in jail or worse. He looked around at all the caged beings and felt his stomach turn. A Zephyrian trader approached them. He was tall and thin, with the typical gray skin of his species. He wore expensive clothes and jewelry that probably cost more than Jake's entire ship. "Welcome, human. I am Vex the merchant. Your friend here tells me you need a companion for your travels. I have many fine specimens from across the galaxy." Jake wanted to tell the alien exactly what he thought of him, but forced himself to stay calm. He walked slowly past the cages, trying not to look too closely at the misery inside them. Most of the beings would not even look up when he passed. Then he saw her. She was in a cage near the back of the room. Her skin was silver blue and had strange markings that seemed to glow softly in the dim light. She looked humanoid, but was clearly not from Earth. Her hair was white, and her eyes were a deep purple color. Unlike most of the other prisoners, she was sitting up straight and watching everything around her. When their eyes met, Jake felt something he had not expected: intelligence. This being had not been broken by whatever she had been through. There was still fight left in her. Vex noticed where Jake was looking, and his smile grew wider. "Ah, you have good taste, human. That is a Lyrian female. Very rare these days since we conquered their homeworld. She is a skilled engineer and mechanic. Very valuable for someone with a ship like yours." Jake asked how much she cost. The price Vex quoted was enormous. It was more money than Jake made in a good year of trading. But something about the way the female Lyrian looked at him made him say yes before he could think about it properly. The paperwork took an hour. Jake had to sign documents in 3 different languages, saying he now legally owned another sentient being. It made him feel dirty, But he told himself he was helping her somehow. When the transaction was complete, Vex had his guards bring the Lyrian out of her cage. She had a metal collar around her neck with blinking lights on it. Her hands were bound with energy restraints that glowed blue. She belongs to you now, human. The collar will keep her obedient, and the restraints will prevent her from using any of her technical skills against you. Be careful, though. Lyrians are clever and will try to escape if given the chance. Jake nodded and took the control device for the collar and restraints. The Lyrian walked beside him quietly as they left the Uster slave market. She did not try to run or fight. She just walked with dignity despite her situation. They made their way back to the docking bay where Lucky Strike was parked. Jake's ship was not much to look at. It was old and battered from years of hard use, but it was his home and his livelihood. As they walked up the ramp into his ship, the Lyrian spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear, and she spoke perfect English with just a slight accent. My name is Kira. Thank you. Jake was surprised she could speak his language so well. He led her to the small crew quarters and then immediately started working on the collar around her neck. The device was alien technology, but Jake had worked on enough different systems over the years to figure out most mechanical things. Kira watched him with confusion as he struggled with the collar's release mechanism. What are you doing? She asked. Getting this damn thing off you, Jake replied as he finally found the right combination of buttons and switches. The collar fell to the floor with a metallic clang. Jake then worked on the energy restraints around her wrists. These were easier and came off quickly. For the first time since he had seen her, Kira smiled. It was not just relief on her face. It was the look of someone who had forgotten what freedom felt like and was remembering it again. The smile transformed her whole appearance from a broken prisoner to a proud being who had just been given back her dignity. In that moment, Jake realized he had not just bought a slave. He had started something much bigger than a simple rescue. He did not know what it was yet, but he could feel that this moment would change both their lives forever. 3 days after leaving Kepler Trade Station, Jake discovered that Kira was much more than she appeared to be. He had been struggling with his navigation system all morning when he came back from getting coffee to find her working on the control panel. Her hands moved quickly over the complex circuits inside the machine. Hey, what are you doing? Jake said, rushing over to stop her. Kira looked up at him calmly. Your navigation array has a damaged quantum processor. If you do not fix it soon, your ship will not be able to calculate jump coordinates properly. You could end up lost in deep space. Jake stared at her. He had been having navigation problems for weeks, but had not been able to figure out what was wrong. The diagnostic systems kept saying everything was fine, but the coordinates were always slightly off. How do you know that? Jake asked. I am an engineer. I can hear the resonance frequency is wrong in your quantum core. Also, your life support efficiency is running at only 60%. I can fix that too if you want. Jake watched as Kira carefully repaired his navigation system using tools she had found in his repair kit. Her movements were precise and confident. She clearly knew exactly what she was doing. Within an hour, she had not only fixed the navigation problem, but had also upgraded his entire propulsion system. When she was done, Jake ran a full diagnostic. Everything was working better than it had in years. His fuel efficiency had increased by 30%, and his engines were running smoother than they ever had. Where did you learn to do that? Jake asked. My people built ships that could travel between galaxies, Kira replied quietly. Before the Zephyrians came, that evening Jake made dinner for both of them. It was simple food from his emergency supplies, but Kira seemed grateful for it. As they ate, she began to tell him about her homeworld and what had happened to her people. Lyrian Confederation had been a peaceful alliance of worlds focused on exploration and scientific discovery. They built beautiful cities that floated in the clouds of gas giants and space stations that could house millions of people. Their ships could cross vast distances quickly and safely. We never built weapons, Jake. We believed that intelligence and curiosity were more powerful than violence. We thought that if we could understand the universe well enough, we could solve any problem without fighting. But when the Zephyrian Empire invaded, they had no way to defend themselves. The Zephyrians had built their entire civilization around conquest and war. Their fleets were massive, and their weapons could destroy entire planets. The war was over in less than a year, Kira continued. Her glowing markings had dimmed as she remembered. The painful events. Most of my people were killed in the fighting. Those who survived were taken as slaves. Jake listened as she described the systematic destruction of Lyrian civilization. The Zephyrians had not just conquered their worlds. They had erased their culture and enslaved their people. Engineers like Kira were forced to build weapons for the Empire that had destroyed their homes. I spent 7 years in their service shipyards. Every day, I had to use my knowledge to make tools of war for the beings who murdered my family. They made me build targeting systems for planet killers and shield generators for their battle fleets. Jake could hear the pain in her voice. He tried to imagine what it would be like to be forced to help your enemies become stronger. The thought made him angry. Why did they keep engineers alive, he asked. Because conquest is easier when you steal the knowledge of the people you defeat. The Zephyrians are not particularly creative. They expand their empire by taking the best ideas from every species they conquer. Lyrian engineering, Corvan manufacturing Altarian computer systems. They absorb everything and make it part of their war machine. But Kira explained that this was not unusual. Throughout Zephyrian space there were thousands of enslaved scientists, engineers, and artists from dozens of different species, all of them forced to use their skills to make their captors stronger. The Empire grows more powerful with every world they conquer. Jake, they do not just take resources and territory. They take minds. Every species they defeat makes them harder. To stop. Jake began to understand the true scale of what he had witnessed at the slave market. It was not just individual cruelty. It was a systematic harvesting of intelligence and creativity from across the galaxy. The Zephyrians were building their empire on the stolen knowledge of their victims. As they talked, Jake started to form a plan. He was just one human with one small ship, but maybe that was enough to start something bigger. He had contacts in human space, military people who would be very interested in what Kira knew about Zephyrian technology and tactics. Instead of heading directly to Earth, Jake changed course for the outer colonies, where human military intelligence had a base. If they were lucky, Colonel Hayes would still be stationed there. She had a reputation for being smart and for not asking too many questions about how information was obtained. But first, Jake had something he needed to ask Kira, a question that had been bothering him since they left the trade station. Kira, why did you smile when I took off that collar? I mean, really smile like something fundamental had changed. She looked at him with those intelligent purple eyes. In 7 years of slavery, you were the first being who treated removing my chains as a priority rather than an inconvenience. Most people see slaves as property that comes with uncomfortable attachments. You saw the chains as the problem, not the person wearing them. Jake had not thought about it that way, but he supposed she was right. His first instinct had been to get the control devices off her, not to figure out how to use them better. That small difference in thinking tells me something important about humans, Kira continued. You have something the Zephyrians do not understand. You see people, not property. That could be very dangerous for them if enough humans start acting on that instinct. Jake smiled at that. Maybe one human with one small ship could make a difference. After all, especially if that human had help from someone who understood both Zephyrian technology and the networks of enslaved people throughout their empire. He opened a star chart and showed Kira their new destination. She studied the coordinates and nodded approvingly. Colonel Hayes will want to hear everything you know about Zephyrian operations, Jake said. But more than that, she will want to know about any other people like you who might be willing to help humanity prepare for what is coming. Kira was quiet for a long moment. Then her markings began to glow brighter as she made a decision. There are others, Jake, more than you might think. Engineers who build weaknesses into Zephyrian weapons. Scientists who provide false research data. Navigators who give wrong coordinates for exploration missions. We have been waiting for someone who could help us do more than just small acts of sabotage. Jake felt a surge of excitement. If there really was a network of people working against the Zephyrians from inside their own empire, then maybe humanity had a chance. Maybe they could do more than just defend themselves. Maybe they could actually fight back. The lucky strike jumped to faster than light speed, heading for the outer colonies and a meeting that would change the course of galactic history. In the navigation chair, Kira smiled again, but this time it was not the smile of freedom. It was the smile of someone who had just realized that revenge might actually be possible. Colonel Lisa Hayes sat across from Kira in the secure briefing room deep inside Fort Harrison. The military base was hidden in an asteroid field at the edge of human space where few ships ever traveled. Hayes had been fighting bureaucrats and politicians for years, trying to get them to take the Zephyrian threat seriously. Now she had proof sitting right in front of her. Kira had been talking for 3 hours describing Zephyrian military capabilities, ship designs, and strategic planning. Every detail she provided painted a picture of an empire far more dangerous than human intelligence had suspected. Hayes took notes on her tablet, while Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner recorded everything for later analysis. If these specifications are accurate, their battle cruisers outgun our dreadnoughts by a factor of 3, Turner said, studying the technical readouts Kira had drawn from memory. Our entire fleet would not be able to stop a single Zephyrian task force. Hayes nodded grimly. She had suspected something like this, but having it confirmed was still shocking. Humanity had been preparing for eventual contact with hostile aliens, but they had assumed any threat would be roughly equal to their own. Technology level. The slavery is not just about labor, Kira continued. It is about assimilation of knowledge. Every species they conquer adds to their technological capabilities. They become stronger with each victory. Jake sat quietly in the corner, watching the military officers process what Kira was telling them. He could see the concern growing on their faces as they realized how outmatched humanity really was. But Kira had more to offer than just bad news. She leaned forward, and her glowing markings brightened as she prepared to share her most important information. There is something else you need to know. Throughout Zephyrian space, there are others like me, enslaved beings who secretly work against their captors. We call ourselves the Resistance of Chains. Hayes looked up from her notes with sudden interest. How many others? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Engineers who build flaws into weapons. Scientists who sabotage research projects. Computer specialists who plant viruses in military systems. We have been waiting for someone with the power to coordinate our efforts. Turner leaned back in his chair, processing this information. You are talking about a resistance network spanning multiple star systems. How do you communicate without being detected? Kira smiled. Zephyrian overseers understand force, but they do not understand subtlety. They monitor our official communications, but they do not watch for patterns in our work. A specific type of circuit failure here. A particular kind of software bug there. We have developed a language of deliberate mistakes. Jake found himself impressed by the ingenuity of it. The Zephyrians had enslaved these people for their technical skills, but had never considered that those same skills could be used against them. Hayes stood up and walked to the large display screen on the wall. She pulled up a map of known Zephyrian territory. It was vast, covering hundreds of star systems and dozens of different species. If we could coordinate with this resistance network, what kind of impact could we have, she asked. Kira studied the map carefully. With proper support, we could cripple their war production. Most of their advanced weapons are built in facilities staffed entirely by slaves. If we could coordinate simultaneous sabotage across multiple worlds, we could set back their military. Expansion by years. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. What Kira was describing was not just intelligence gathering or small-scale sabotage. She was talking about organizing a galactic rebellion. Jake cleared his throat. There is one problem. How do we make contact with this resistance network? Kira cannot exactly send them a message saying she has been rescued and is now working with human military. Colonel Has turned to look at Jake with a calculating expression. That is where you come in, Morrison. Jake had been afraid she was going. To say something like that, we want you to go back out there as a traitor, Hayes continued. But this time, you will be working for us. You will make contact with members of the resistance network and help coordinate their activities. But that would mean, Jake started to say, then stopped. He realized what she was asking him to do. Have to buy more slaves, Turner said, finishing Jake's thought. To maintain your cover, you would need to appear to be a normal trader participating in the market. Jake felt sick at the idea. He had barely been able to handle buying Kira, and that was to rescue her. The thought of doing it repeatedly, even as a cover story, made his stomach turn. To free them, Kira said quietly. You would not be buying slaves, Jake. You would be recruiting agents. Hayes nodded. Every person you purchase and liberate becomes part of our network. They can then make contact with others in their home systems. Within a few months, we could have agents throughout Zephyrian space. Jake looked around the room at the expectant faces. He understood the logic, but it still felt wrong to participate in the slave trade, even for good reasons. What about the cost? He asked. Those prices are enormous. I could never afford to buy enough people to make a real difference. Colonel Hayes smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Let me worry about funding Morrison. Humanity's survival is worth whatever. This costs. Over the next several hours, they worked out the details of the operation. Jake would return to neutral space with a ship full of valuable trade goods. He would establish himself as a regular customer at various slave markets. Slowly and carefully, he would purchase individuals who Kira identified as likely resistance. Members. Each rescued person would be debriefed and then given a choice. They could be transported to safe worlds where they could start new lives. Or they could return to Zephyrian space as free agents working to undermine the Empire from within. It was dangerous. If the Zephyrians discovered what was happening, they would execute everyone involved. But it was also the first real hope for stopping their expansion. Kira would coordinate the operation. Her knowledge of resistance communication methods and her ability to identify key targets would be essential. She would also help train the rescued agents and maintain contact with the growing network. The plan had one more element that made Jake nervous. As the operation expanded, they would need to recruit other human traders to help with the work. More ships buying more people and making more contacts. Eventually, they hoped to build a fleet of liberation vessels operating throughout the galaxy. When do we start? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Hayes checked her watch. Your new ship and cargo will be ready in 48 hours. We have also prepared identity documents that will establish you as a wealthy trader from the outer colonies. Jake looked at Kira, who nodded encouragingly. He thought about all the people still trapped in those cages on Kepler Trade Station and countless other slave markets throughout Zephyrian space. Then he thought about Kira's smile when her collar had fallen away. All right, he said. But I want one thing understood. Every person we buy gets offered real freedom. No more collars, no more chains, no more being treated like property. Colonel Hayes extended her hand. Deal Morrison. Now let's go free a galaxy dot as they shook hands. Jake realized he was no longer just a cargo pilot trying to make a living. He had become something he had never expected to be. He had become a liberator. The thought scared him, but it also filled him with purpose. Outside the asteroid base, the stars waited. Somewhere among them, thousands of enslaved beings were hoping for rescue. Jake intended to make sure they got it. 6 months later, Jake's operation had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. The Lucky Strike now traveled with 3 other converted cargo ships, each crewed by former slaves who had chosen to become liberation agents. What had started as a desperate rescue mission had become a sophisticated intelligence network spanning 12 star systems. Jake stood on the bridge of his flagship looking out at the industrial world of Zarian Prime. The planet's surface was covered with massive factories that produced war machines for the Zephyrian Empire. Millions of enslaved beings worked in those facilities building the weapons that would be used to conquer more worlds. Today, they were going to shut it all down. Kira joined him at the observation window. Her glowing markings were brighter and nigh usual, which Jake had learned meant she was excited or nervous. Probably both in this case. The resistance cells on Zerion Prime have been preparing for months, she said. When we give the signal, they will simultaneously sabotage every major production facility on the planet. Jake nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. Intelligence reports suggested that Zerion Prime was developing something called Project Dominion, a weapon system that could sterilize entire worlds from orbit. They had to make sure the technology never made it into Zephyrian hands. Sam Rodriguez walked up to join them. The former Earth Navy demolitions expert had been rescued from a research station 3 months ago. His knowledge of explosives and engineering systems had made him invaluable to their operations. I have studied the facility schematics Kira provided, Sam said. The main power generators are heavily defended, but there are maintenance tunnels that lead directly to the primary control systems. If we can get inside, we can overload the entire grid. Dr. Maya Patel approached from the communication station. The xenobiologist had developed a computer virus specifically designed to cripple Zephyrian systems. Her rescue from a bioweapons facility had been one of their most dangerous missions. The virus is ready, she announced. Once it uploads to their main network, it will spread to every connected system on the planet. Their computers will be useless for weeks. Jake looked around at his team. 6 months ago, they had all been slaves or simple traders. Now they were planning to cripple one of the most important industrial worlds in the Zephyrian Empire. The transformation was remarkable, but the key to everything was their contact inside the main facility. A Lyrian engineer named Zek, who had been forced to design targeting systems for Project Dominion. Kira had made contact with him through the Resistance Network's subtle communication methods. Zek has been building flaws into the weapon systems for months, Kira explained. But he can do much more than that if we can coordinate with him directly. He knows the location of every critical system in the complex. The plan was their most ambitious yet. Jake's team would create a distraction at the main trading hub while Kira and Sam infiltrated the industrial complex. At exactly midnight station time, Resistance members throughout the facility would turn on their Zephyrian overseers. It was dangerous. If the Zephyrians discovered what was happening before the uprising began, they would execute everyone involved. But intelligence suggested that Project Dominion was nearly complete. They were running out of time. Jake checked his chronometer. 2 hours until midnight. Remember, Jake said, addressing his team, our primary objective is to destroy Project Dominion and extract the technical data. Everything else is secondary. If things go wrong, do not try to be heroes. Get out and live to fight another day. But even as he said it, Jake knew none of them would abandon the mission if there was any chance of success. They had all seen too much suffering to walk away when they could make a difference. The operation began exactly on schedule. Jake's team landed at the civilian trading port and began unloading cargo containers filled with valuable goods. To any observer, they looked like normal merchants conducting business. Meanwhile, Kira and Sam approached the industrial complex from the maintenance sector. Security was lighter there because the Zephyrians assumed slaves would never try to escape. Through the dangerous machinery areas. At exactly midnight station time, everything went wrong and right at the same time. The uprising began as planned. Throughout the massive facility, enslaved workers suddenly produced improvised weapons and turned on their overseers. Years of rage and desperation erupted into violence as people who had been treated like property fought for their freedom. But the Zephyrians had been expecting trouble. Not this specific attack, but something. Their security response was faster and more organized than Jake had anticipated. Within minutes of the uprising beginning, armed soldiers were pouring into every sector of the complex. Jake found himself pinned down in the trading sector by Zephyrian security forces. Energy bolts flew over his head as he crouched behind a cargo container, trying to reach his communications equipment. The sound of fighting echoed throughout the station. Explosions boomed in the distance as Sam's charges destroyed key infrastructure. But Jake could tell from the radio chatter that the resistance fighters were taking heavy casualties. His communicator crackled with static. Kira's voice came through weak and distorted. Jake, we have the data on Project Dominion, but the facility is going into lockdown. The main computer core is sealed behind glass doors. We might not make it out. Jake's heart sank. The mission was succeeding, but at a terrible cost. He could hear the desperation in Kira's voice even through the static. Looking around at the chaos erupting throughout the station, Jake realized that success might require a sacrifice he was not prepared to make. All around him, people were fighting and dying for freedom. But what if their deaths meant nothing if the mission failed? Then he remembered something Kira had told him weeks earlier during one of their planning sessions. Freedom is not something you can give to someone else, Jake. It is something people have to take for themselves. You just have to give them the opportunity. Jake made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of trying to reach Kira and Sam, he activated the emergency beacon that would signal all human ships in the system to begin their attack. The Battle of Zirion Prime was about to begin. Within minutes, the first human warships dropped out of hyperspace. They had been waiting at the edge of the system for Jake's signal. Admiral Collins had positioned a full battle group in preparation for this moment. As the human fleet engaged the Zephyrian defenders, Jake fought his way through the station toward the industrial complex. He had to reach Kira and Sam before the facility was completely destroyed. Behind him, explosions lit up the sky as capital ships exchanged fire. The Liberation fleet that had grown from his small operation was finally showing its true power. But Jake only cared about reaching his friends. Station shook as another explosion rocked the industrial sector. Jake ran faster, knowing that time was running out for everyone trapped inside the complex. He reached the entrance to the main facility just as Kira and Sam emerged carrying data storage devices and supporting an injured Lyrian who had to be Zek. All three of them were covered in dust and blood, but they were alive. Did you get it? Jake asked. Everything, Kira replied breathlessly. Complete specifications for Project Dominion, plus detailed intelligence on their entire military structure. This will change the war. Jake helped them toward the evacuation ships as the battle raged around them. In the distance, he could see that the uprising had spread beyond the station. On the planet's surface, massive explosions marked the destruction of weapons factories. The smile on Kira's face was not the desperate smile of freedom. he remembered from their first meeting. This was the confident smile of someone who had struck a decisive blow against their enemies. As their ship lifted off from the dying station, Jake realized that everything had changed. They were no longer just rescuing individuals or conducting small raids. They had started a war. And for the first time, Jake believed they might actually win it. The Battle of Zerion Prime lasted only 6 hours, but those 6 hours changed the course of galactic history. What Jake had intended as a targeted strike against one weapons facility became the spark that ignited a galaxy-wide revolution. As news of the uprising spread through subspace communications networks, enslaved populations on 17 different worlds simultaneously rebelled. The resistance network that Kira had helped build revealed itself as a sophisticated organization spanning half the Zephyrian Empire. Jake stood on the bridge of the New Liberty, watching the aftermath unfold on dozens of communication screens. Each display showed a different liberated world where former slaves were now free citizens working to rebuild their societies. The data they had extracted from Project Dominion proved even more valuable than expected. Not only did it contain complete specifications for the planet-killing weapon, but it included detailed intelligence on Zephyrian military deployments, resource allocations, and strategic planning. Most importantly, it contained a comprehensive database of every enslaved population throughout the Empire. Names, locations, and skills of millions of beings who had been reduced to property. Jake's Liberation Network now had a complete target list for future operations. Admiral Patricia Collins approached Jake as he studied the intelligence reports. Her battle group had arrived at the rendezvous point in the Tau Ceti system where the growing Liberation fleet was assembling. "Your operation has changed our entire strategic picture, Morrison," she said. "We are not just facing an invasion anymore. We are looking at the liberation of an entire galaxy." Jake looked around at the dozens of ships that now made up their fleet. Converted cargo vessels, repurposed warships, and newly constructed fighters, all crewed by beings from dozens of different species. What had started as one human buying one slave had grown into something unprecedented in galactic history. The war that followed was unlike anything the Zephyrians had expected. They had built their empire on the assumption that conquered peoples would remain helpless and divided. They had never faced an organized resistance, backed by superior intelligence and coordination. With the resistance network providing detailed information about every Zephyrian facility, the Liberation fleet could strike with surgical precision. They hit weapons factories, research stations, and command centers while avoiding civilian targets. More importantly, they continued to free enslaved populations wherever they found them. Each liberated world became a new source of ships technology and personnel for the growing coalition. Jake continued his liberation operations, but now as part of a massive fleet. His original ship, Lucky Strike, had been retired and replaced with a purpose-built liberation vessel called Freedom's Dawn. The new ship had holding facilities for hundreds of rescued beings and manufacturing capability to produce the equipment they needed. Every rescued slave became a free citizen of the coalition of free worlds. Engineers rebuilt damaged infrastructure, scientists shared knowledge freely, and artists created works celebrating the diversity of galactic civilization. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting a war on multiple fronts against enemies who knew their every weakness. Internal sabotage crippled their production, while external attacks destroyed their military assets. Their empire began to collapse from within as much as from outside pressure. 1 year after Jake had first seen Kira in that holding cell on Kepler trade station, he stood beside her on the bridge of the New Lyria. A massive battleship had been built using the combined technology of 24 liberated species. As the ship's chief engineer and Jake's partner in both war and life, Kira watched as the last Zephyrian stronghold prepared to surrender. The fortress world of Zephyria Prime had held out longer than most, but even they could not resist the inevitable. Their slave workforce had rebelled, their defenses had been sabotaged, and their fleet had been scattered across the galaxy. Admiral Collins contacted them from the Coalition flagship. The Zephyrian High Command is requesting terms for surrender, she announced. They want to negotiate. Jake looked at Kira, who shook her head firmly. No negotiations, she said. Unconditional surrender only. They can choose between that and complete destruction. The choice was easy. Faced with the combined fleets of dozens of liberated worlds, the Zephyrian Empire formally surrendered. The age of galactic slavery was over. The celebration that followed lasted for weeks. Across hundreds of worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives in chains were finally free. The Coalition established new governments based on the principles of equality and cooperation that humanity had introduced. Jake found himself honored as one of the founders of the new galactic order, but he was more interested in the quieter work of helping liberated peoples rebuild their societies. There were still millions of beings who needed homes, jobs, and hope for the future. As the new Lyria set course for the liberated Lyrian homeworld, Jake reflected on how a simple act of decency had cascaded into galactic revolution. He had bought one slave to get his ship repaired and ended up liberating an entire galaxy. Did you ever imagine it would lead to this? Kira asked, standing beside him as they watched the stars. Jake smiled, remembering that moment in the slave market when he had first seen the intelligence in her purple eyes. I knew something important was happening when you smiled after I removed that collar. But this— Jake gestured at the fleet of free ships around them. This is beyond anything I could have imagined. Kira nodded. I knew it would lead somewhere important the moment you prioritized removing my chains over learning how to use them. Humans have this remarkable quality. You see people, not property. That changes everything. She was right, Jake realized. The difference between slavery and freedom was not just about laws or economics. It was about how you saw other beings. The Zephyrians had looked at conquered peoples and seen resources to be exploited. Humans looked at those same beings and saw individuals deserving of dignity and respect. As the new Lyria approached the restored Lyrian homeworld, Jake watched construction ships rebuilding the floating cities that had been destroyed decades earlier. Former slaves were now free engineers creating beautiful structures that celebrated their rediscovered culture. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but the greatest discovery had been the power of treating all sentient beings with the dignity they deserved. It was such a simple concept, but it had been enough to topple an empire and free a galaxy. Jake thought about all the people still working throughout Coalition space to heal the damage that centuries of slavery had caused. There would be challenges ahead as dozens of different species learned to live together as equals. But they had something the Zephyrians had never possessed. They had hoped. In the end, the smile of freedom had become the foundation of peace. One person choosing to see another as worthy of dignity had started a chain reaction that transformed the galaxy. Jake looked at Kira, whose glowing markings reflected the light of her homeworld sun, and realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could have the biggest consequences. The new Lyria entered orbit around the restored Lyrian homeworld, where millions of free beings were building a better future. Below them on the planet's surface, children who had never known slavery played in gardens, while their parents worked to create a civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. It was not the end of their story. Jake knew there would always be new challenges and new opportunities to choose between seeing others as people or as property. But they had proven that freedom was stronger than fear, and that dignity was more powerful than domination. The smile of liberation had become a beacon of hope that would shine across the galaxy for generations to come.